this is, it's classified as fiction, but it's heavily based on fact. This is primarily the story of my wife's family, which was split apart in the early days of the Korean War. So I made a few changes. I changed my wife into a young boy because it was easier to write about a young boy than a young girl. But otherwise, the events in here are true to history. I'll start with the prologue. Bridge over Pyongyang is the story of two generations of a Korean family and their story for survival. The first generation overcomes the hardships and the dangers of the Korean War. But the second generation also faces formidable challenges in the United States. This is told through Jin Tak Park, a Korean boy growing up amidst the strife and racial tensions in South Central Los Angeles during the time of the Rodney King riots. His Oma, mother, and Opa, father, gentle people who speak little English, bought the tiny Sunshine Market with money borrowed from their Uncle Young, hoping for a better life for their children. Jin Tak, 16, and his sister June, 17, help run the market and attend a school infested with drugs, gangs, and violence. Dreaming of becoming a boxer, like his hero, the late Duk-Koo Kim, Jin Tak finds an outlet for his pent-up emotions and escapes the tedium of the store at Duke's Gym, where he earns a grudging respect from the blacks and Latinos for his hard work, gutsy boxing style, and a devastating left hook. Although gang members torment Jin Tak at school and the market, he warily reaches across a cultural divide to risk friendship and discovers a bond that transcends race and color. But outside the ring, trouble spiraled. Long-simmering racial tensions boil over when a Korean grocer, just a mile from the Sunshine Market, shoots and kills a 15-year-old black girl for allegedly attempting to steal a carton of orange juice. The African-American community is outraged, and on top of this, the Rodney King trial looms over Los Angeles like a thundercloud. The media seems to fan the flames as the city holds its breath, awaiting a verdict. Meanwhile, Jin Tak trains with Marcus, a gangly black youth, for his first few fights. The two boys, almost opposites in almost every way, run through the jungle together, a bleak and decaying inner-city gauntlet. Outwardly, Marcus is tough, bitter, and angry. So Jin Tak is stunned to learn that his grandmother signed Marcus up for boxing lessons because other kids were picking on him. A talented student who plays piano, Marcus hides behind a facade of cruelty and gang bravado. Their relationship is awkward and strained, and Jin Tak considers giving up on Marcus. He could never count on him anyway, or could he? As the story grinds toward the apocalyptic climax, the worst civil disturbance in American history, the odds seem overwhelmingly stacked against Jin Tak and his family. But as he learns, when you have friends, you have hope. I'm going to start reading from the third chapter in my book, which is after the outbreak of the Korean War. The Park family, father has left. He went away to hide in the mountains because the Chinese army was taking all the men and recruiting them into the army. If they didn't want to go, they bayoneted them or shot them. If Hyun was safe, the rest of the family was not. The bombings and random killings of civilians intensified, and T-34 Russian tanks flanked by Chinese volunteer army troops swept through Pyongyang and the surrounding villages. They would soon clash with the U.S. and Republic of Korea forces in a battle for the city. Word spread to the entire region that the only hope for freedom was to go south of the 38th parallel. With the atrocities and horror of the Japanese occupation fresh in the minds of the Koreans, a vast exodus began. Byung-ya had to go tell her husband that the family must leave immediately for Seoul, a distance of some 180 miles. Communist troops were forming over the country, so she would travel at night and by foot. But what to do about her children? Taking them seemed impossible, yet Byung hated to leave them. Finally, she decided the 4 older children would stay with their grandparents. Since she was nursing young Kim, she would carry him on her back. Before she left, Byung and her family ate kimchi soup, oat rice, and prayed together. She pulled on 2 pairs of socks and wrapped her hair with 2 scarves as she left. It was already snowing in the foothills of the Nangnim Mountains. Byung hushed her older children, rocked them to sleep, and kissed them goodbye. Her father-in-law pressed a wad of Korean bills in her pocket, telling her to use the money to bribe guards or soldiers. He took off his watch and tried to put it on her wrist, but the band was too large and it slipped off. He stuck it in her pocket also. Byung wrapped up young Kim and placed him in a homemade baby harness and pulled the straps around her shoulder. "I'll get Hyun. We'll be back in a week. Be ready to leave." She lifted the basket, filled with boiled potatoes, dried fish, salted pork, rice, and a bottle of water. It was heavy. She stepped outside and waved goodbye. It was a clear, crisp evening, and the road to Pyongyang showed no signs of traffic. Young Kim, not yet 2 months old, cried nearly every step of the way. Byung was surprised and relieved when she left town without incident. Next, she had to cross the Taedong Bridge a few miles to the northwest. She'd crossed it at least 100 times before to visit her nephews and nieces. The massive soaring structure loomed before her, a narrow suspension bridge nearly 2 miles long. The water below was not especially deep, but it was about 500 yards wide with treacherous currents. The Taedong River, or Fei-su as it was formerly called, winds for 250 kilometers and feeds more than 50 large and small tributaries. Byung knew the river well. It flowed past the park's farmland and southeastward to Chinampo, where her grandparents once lived. A fishing village that had grown into a sizable port city, Chinampo sat on an inlet of the Korean Bay just 50 miles from where she now stood. When Byung visited the town as a child, she sometimes helped her grandfather check his fishing nets and clean the catch. Her grandmother taught her to pickle and jar the fish and prepare the baby shrimp. At the farm, Byung carried baskets of soiled work clothes down to the Taedong and scrubbed them clean in its sparkling waters. As a child, she swam in the river on many hot summer days, along with her brothers and sisters. Her father tied a rope around a large branch of the chestnut tree hanging out over the river. The children used to see who could swing furthest out before dropping into the Taedong's refreshing waters. She leaned on a railing and peered downstream at the 2 Pusan-Seoul-Mukden railroad bridges and the distant flickering lights from several lanterns. Hearing the voices of North Korean soldiers over young Kim's cries, she took him out of the harness and began nursing him. She walked forward, arms aching from the weight of her baby in the basket. Her heart hammered furiously as she walked on, almost daring the sentries to stop her. With every step, she expected to hear, "Jung-hee!" the command to halt. Byung walked past one soldier who looked at her casually as he lit a cigarette. Another soldier stood near the edge of the bridge, urinating into the river hundreds of feet below. He smirked at her but said nothing. Reaching the far side of the bridge, Byung-ha looked up at the heavens in gratitude. 1,000 stars winked at her from beyond the black veil of night, and a full moon, a harvest moon with faint streaks of blue and gray across its center, shined down on the Taedong, reflecting in milky fragments off of the ripples and back eddies. Over the rushing and gurgling water, distant cannons rumbled, and the flashes of heavy artillery flickered, lighting up the sky like heat lightning in late summer. Tugging at her shoulder straps, Byung paused for a second, gazing back into the life of Pyongyang, praying for her family and herself.